So Debra Allcock Tyler is well known to most of you, and of course she's a speaker for tomorrow. So when she agreed to do the keynote speech, too good an opportunity to miss, and we asked her to do this session for leaders in addition to her keynote speech. So thank you so much, Debra, for doing that. For those of you that don't know, Debra is the CEO of the Directory of Social Change, and she has got lots of years experience of training and coaching boards, chief executive and senior teams. She's written lots and lots of books, including this one, which I don't know if you can see it. It's called The Battle on the Board. I've just got hold of it. So any of the visionary trustees that are in the room, just watch out now that I've read quite a lot of this. It's, you know, even if you're not a trustee, it's a really useful way of thinking about how to communicate with boards of trustees. And just by the way, Debra doesn't actually make any money out of these books, all of which are amazing. I think that's the most recent one, Debra, but all the proceeds go to the Directory of Social Change. So if you're buying these books, it's for a really good cause. I'm going to be quiet now and hand over to Debra. And we'll take it from there, and there'll be the opportunity for discussion in a wee while. Okay, Debra, thank you. I will mute myself now.
Hi, welcome all. And Carol, you've made me laugh with the, yes, you're throwing down the toast. I exactly know the feeling. It's like in this Zoom world that we're in right now. I mean, I barely have time to pee. I put in it like, you know, you put in requests at work for like appropriate working from home kit, like chairs and desks and things. I've asked for a commode, because, you know, that would just make life a lot easier. And I think really this is what this session is supposed to be about today. This I kind of think is like group therapy for chief execs, you know, and senior leaders in our sector. I think this is about sharing the woes and the agonies and the difficulties of leadership, and talking about some ideas of how to keep ourselves focused and positive, and how to keep our teams on point and stuff like that. So I'm not going to like make speeches or anything like that. I'm going to make a couple of remarks to kind of like get us off the ground, but I'm much more interested in us really having a proper conversation about what it's like. And I think, you know, I've just written my latest article for Third Sector, which I think is coming out today or tomorrow, which is about making this point that if you're feeling exhausted and stressed and anxious at the moment, that's a very normal, appropriate response to the absolutely shitty time we're going through. You know, I think as I'm often saying to chief execs who I'm, you know, my mates and people I'm working alongside or mentoring, is saying, don't beat yourself up for feeling bad. Actually, this is a really tough time. And the thing about it is I kind of said, you know, to my trustees the other day, it's times like this that we're actually paid for. You know, this is when we've really got to step up and demonstrate our worth, because anybody can lead an organization when it's easy. Anybody can lead in success when the money's more or less coming in, when there's nothing particularly dramatic, when the most dramatic thing is that two of your trustees don't get on and you can't get your strategic plan through. You know, God, do you remember those days when that was a thing you had sleepless nights about? Oh, I long for that. I long for those days. Or that two members of your senior team weren't getting on, or that a particular project wasn't going as well. You know, that's relatively easy leadership challenges. This is the real test of our leadership. And this is the time where this is what I'm so proud of when I look around at, you know, my colleagues in the charitable sector, as how almost without exception, everybody's just stepping up and getting on with it. You know, my grandmother, when I was a young girl, and I used to whinge and moan a lot, I still do whinge and moan, to be honest, but I used to moan a lot about how unfair the world was and how I wasn't treating me properly and what have you. And my grandmother always used to say, put your big girl pants on and get on with it. And I think there's kind of something about that now, that this is the time when we prove ourselves as leaders. But that isn't to say it isn't knackering, exhausting and tiring. And that's why I think conferences like this and organizations like Visionary are so important, because I think that when you're not sharing your agony, because you can't really share it in work, can you? No matter how brilliant a relationship you have with your board of trustees, you know, we don't want them to think we're falling to bits. So we do tend to put on the strong face, don't we? Of course we do. That's normal. Even if they're lovely, kind, you know, supportive and all the rest of it, we want them to think we're capable and competent. And we also can't really share our kind of like deep, fears and anxieties with our teams, because we're leading those teams and we need them to, again, feel confident and that they can trust us. And those are appropriate. There's nothing inauthentic about being strong for our teams. But in order to keep ourselves okay, it's so important in environments like this to say, do you know what, I had a really shitty day last week and I handled everything badly. And actually, truthfully, I did. Last Wednesday, I don't know whether it was the stress of everything that was going on in America or anything like that, but I had one of those days when I was deeply ashamed of my leadership skills and thinking, I teach people how to do this, you'd think I would know by now. So I think there's also something about giving yourself a break when you have those shitty days, and also being able to say, I'm just disappearing for a couple of days, okay, just to go and get under the duvet and cry for a bit, and I'll be back on Friday, and everything will be fine again. So I think there is also something about us forgiving ourselves for what's going on and for taking care of ourselves. Loving the cat, Emma. I have to say, I have a basset hound called Arthur, who is, well, we call him the bass hole, because he is one of those creatures who just torments and annoys pretty much most of the time. Luckily, right now, he's asleep on the sofa, so I should get away with this without interruption. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, so there's something about, making sure that you're sharing alongside colleagues, and your peers, and actually being able to say, I'm really struggling right now, because it's safe then, isn't it? Because then you get people to say, Ethne, Chloe, Ruth, Mike, Graham, you're doing fine. It'll be okay. It's all right to have that little sob and that weep. And I think, there's also something, because somebody was talking to me the other day about imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is one of the things that really irritates me. It's like, I can't think of a single person I know in the whole world who doesn't sometimes feel they're out of their depth, or they're not coping, or they're going to get caught out. And I think with all the stresses and worries we currently have, why on earth would we add a syndrome to it? It's like, if you're feeling like you're a fake, you're not. You're feeling exactly the same way most of us feel at some point during our lives as leaders, and it's completely normal to feel that. Don't turn it into a big thing that it isn't. Just get that you will have those moments. And the key thing is, most of the time when you're feeling inadequate, nobody else realizes that's what's going on for you. So I think there's something about, honoring your humanness and finding those groups of people that you can share it with, and also thinking about, the fact that this is kind of our test. It is our test, and there will be time for us to rest. And I think also recognizing, even though our sector is in a really bad shape, and I'll talk about that in my keynote tomorrow, nonetheless, there is hope. There are signs of things getting better and things improving. Anyway, that's my starter for 10, Fiona. So I'm really interested now in people's thoughts, questions, comments, and for us just to have really basically, well, group therapy, really, a bit of a sob. You were told to bring tissues, weren't you?
Okay, Deborah, so how do you want to do this? Because we have, including us, we've got 26 people here, some with cameras, some without. We can use the wee hand thing, which I can't actually find. But so
people could wave if they've got their cameras on. And if they haven't got their cameras on, if they pop their names into the chat, and just say it's, whoever it is, Maggie. And then we can then say, Maggie, and then you can unmute her, Fiona, and then she can ask her question. So yeah, I'd keep it really relaxed and sort of chatty. I think, Emma, you were waving. Yes. I think, Fiona, if you unmute everybody.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Themselves, yeah.
Right, so while you're chatting, I'm going to find a way to unmute everyone.
Yeah, and then they can mute themselves, can't they?
I don't think you can unmute everybody. I think they have to unmute themselves.
Oh, okay.
No, I think I muted everybody though.
Yeah, but I don't think you can unmute. I think that's up to everybody individually. Sorry.
Right, so I've asked everyone to unmute, which should give you the power to unmute yourselves when you want to.
Emma, go. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what you were saying about giving ourselves a break, really. It's something I talk to my staff about sort of almost every week, it seems, at the moment, that, things that go slightly wrong and, the plans that you have put in place to respond to this situation don't always go the right way. And, we do beat ourselves up. And I do think it's really important that we recognise that this is completely out of the ordinary situation that we're in, and that it's okay to mess up every now and then. It's it's how you deal with that afterwards, basically. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Yeah, I mean, that really is it's difficult to do. I think it is really difficult to do because you're so in the moment, and you're so sort of worried about your service users and, you know, your staff and all that kind of thing, that actually it is really difficult to pull yourself back out of that and go, hang on a minute, you know, let's just take 5 minutes, everything's fine, we'll do it'll be fine in the end, and just kind of get on with it that way. But yeah, I feel it's really, really important to actually take time out for ourselves to recognize what it is that we are actually doing and what we've actually done, because this sector has been phenomenal throughout this whole COVID horror. And yeah, so yeah, please stop everybody beating yourselves up, because it's not worth it.
And also being forced into like making big strategic decisions. You know, I right now, all you need to concentrate on really is surviving. You know, it's really okay not to be talking about the big long-term future of, you know, sight loss charities and things like that. Right now, it's really okay to just think, let's get to Christmas. And then after Christmas, let's see if we can get through the first quarter of next year. And I think that, you know, one of the things that really worries me is that some of my colleagues making massively big strategic decisions about the future in reaction to now. And I'm sort of like, don't make big decisions about the future based on the circumstances of today, because precisely as we've been saying, that it's not, I don't want to use the unprecedented word because it's driving me nuts, but, you know, this is not a typical situation in which we find ourselves. I mean, I don't know about you, we're at DSC, we're trying to construct our budget for next year. So our financial year runs January to December, and it's a nightmare because typically we would look at the pattern of what's happened in our income over previous years, particularly the year before, and then we'd extrapolate that, you know, changing circumstances. This year, it's like, what do you compare it to? You know, this for at least 4, if not 5 months of this year, we had literally no money at all coming in, not a penny. You know, so how can you compare what was happening this year to last year? So luckily my board's fantastic, and they basically said, just build in something that's flexible. Don't build in costs that we can't get out of quickly. You know, just make sure that when you're constructing it, and we're not going to hold you to it, we just want to make sure that, you know, we can respond very quickly if we need to. And I think we have to be a bit like that. I mean, for the first time ever at DSC, I'm going to go to my trustees with a budget that's got like basically a wiggle room of about £100,000 at the end of whether we make a surplus. Because I don't know, we're going to aim to be able to put a little bit back in the coffers, but the reality is we could equally as well make loss next year. I don't know. So I'm going to have to go and say, look, can you tolerate this wiggle room? That's going to be the question that I ask you. Luckily, honestly, my trustees are absolutely fantastic, and they've been, you know, absolutely on the ball this time through. But I will say, you know, we get some credit for that because we've kept them really well informed. We've engaged them at the right sort of levels. We haven't been defensive. We've recognized that it's really frightening for trustees too right now. You know, we're worried, but trustees are the accountable ones, and they're not the ones doing the work. So that, you know, so I think trustees, we have to be particularly sympathetic to them to a certain degree right now, because they must be feeling very powerless and very anxious about what's going on, and yet we're the ones who've got the power to make things happen. So we've also treated our trustees with a lot of love and kindness and gratitude for them, and I think that makes a difference too. I have to say, I know that lots of trustees are not behaving quite as well as my board is. Some of them are nervous and anxious and a bit demanding. You know, I tend to look at that saying, I kind of understand that. You know, they're human beings, that they shouldn't be being like that. They should be more supportive, more constructive, but actually at the end of the day, they're as worried and scared as the rest of us are. So I think, yeah, there's a real, if any of you are struggling a bit with your trustees, I'm sure you're not, of course, Fiona, but if any of you are, I would start by looking at them with real sympathy and remember what it feels like when you have absolutely no power. It's a bit like, I think, when you're the parent of a teenager and that teenager's gone off to uni, you have no power or control whatsoever over what they do and how they're going to cope. And it just makes it even more anxious for us, I think. Not that I'm saying we're acting like teenagers, you know, as chief executives, far from it. But, you know, I do think that kind of sympathy of a feeling of not really having a lot of control. Anybody else got anything they wanted to say, contribute, offload, share? You're doing good stuff. Ruth. Oh, you're on mute.
Ruth, you should be.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I want to behave like a teenager. In fact, I did quite a lot earlier this year. I seem to have spent all year being very angry.
Yeah.
And I think one issue for me is, and it's something that I've had a beef about for quite a few years, is calling ourselves the third sector. I don't know what we're third to. Historically, we're first. Without us, a lot of the infrastructure of the whole country couldn't exist. And it really brought it home to me earlier this year, when all those hundreds, millions of pounds were all being donated and raised by wonderful people to the NHS. We all stood outside and clapped for nurses. And then as an afterthought, a third thought, oh, by the way, we've got a voluntary and community sector out there who are paid far less, get far less recognition, get no, if any, money at all. And even if we do, we've got to fight tooth and nail for it. And yet without them, the NHS just would be absolutely swamped, and all the other statutory sector. And so every time, and I mean, my daughters, I've got a background in NHS management, huge respect for the NHS. I think they're absolutely brilliant. But it's just about how we brand ourselves. How do we convey that to the wider world? And one of my things is third sector. I think that's not a good term to use. I don't have anything better. A voluntary community and faith sector is really snappy, isn't it? No, but I think we think ourselves as third, and that conveys that to the public as what? Third in place, third rate, third what? I know it's only a word, but as I say, I've spent most of my year being angry. I'm angry now about it. And if this is group therapy, I'm sorry, but that's what I'm using it for.
Oh, that's fine. I'm angry too, Ruth, honestly. And I've been angry for decades. I mean, I've been working in the sector for over 30 years, and I've been pissed off most of that time. You know what I mean? It's like, I forgot what it's like not to be cross with people about stuff. I absolutely agree with you. I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know, personally, I tend to use the term charity sector because I think that encompasses pretty much all of it, you know. But I think you're right. Language matters enormously. I was talking to somebody about how we talk about elderly people, and I was saying, isn't it interesting that, like, when my mum was younger, I would say, me and my mum are going out to lunch. As she's older now, I say, I'm taking my mum to lunch.
Yeah.
And it's like we say, like, you know, my mum fell over. And now she's older, she had a fall. It's almost like we take away that sense of agency. I think we actually do that with people with disabilities as well. Generally, we tend to describe them as if they have no power or no agency over their lives. So I'm absolutely with you. I think language does matter. I think up until this government, quite a bit, it was our fault. Because, you know, we have a tendency, especially those of us who are fighting for public funds, we have a tendency to perhaps not really say what we really think or not correct people because, you know what, it's not worth the fight and we want the money and we don't want to piss anybody off. So to a certain degree, I think that has been within our control. Now, of course, with this government, I mean, and this is not a particularly party political point because I voted for everybody at one point or another. I'm one of those weird people who reads the manifestos and tries to look at it cleanly without having any particular affiliations. But this government is impossible to deal with. And again, I'll talk more about that in my keynote tomorrow. And so I think now is absolutely the time for us to get our guts back in a way and our courage back and to start, because the honest truth is pissing them off isn't going to change anything. They're not giving us money anyway. Though actually there's no harm in us saying this is not good enough, it needs to change, because even though us saying that isn't probably going to make it change right now, that message getting out to the communities that we serve, to our fellow charities, gives them strength and inspiration. It gives people permission to say, I agree, Ruth's absolutely right about that, and we need to do something about it, or it needs to change, or, you know, stop patronizing us and stuff like that. So I think language does matter. And I think if there was ever a time when there's almost no risk, because do you know what? There isn't any money and they're not going to give, well, sorry, there's loads of money, actually, but it's not coming our way. So, you know, so we've got nothing to lose. So why not be brave and, you know, yeah. Somebody, A.O. Kane, I don't know what the name is saying, I can't see where to wait to make a comment. I think it's because your camera's not on. But if you unmute, there you go.
Yeah.
Hiya, you need to unmute.
You need to unmute yourself.
That's it. Hiya.
Yeah.
Hello there, how are you?
Hiya, good, lovely to see you.
Oh, good to be here. First of all, I just have a couple of very short comments to make, really. First of all, thanks for the session. It's great to feel that I'm not unique. I'm feeling a bit crap at the minute, and how refreshing it is to hear somebody at your level saying shitty. So thanks for that. You know, it seems very authentic. I just want to say that this is an extraordinary time. So it's a time for extraordinary self-care. This is going to look differently to everybody. So I really want to say, just encourage people to reflect on what gives you joy within the current restrictions. If you're exhausted, give yourself a really early night. You know, it's okay to go to bed at 7 o'clock. Who cares? It's okay. It really is okay. And then the last thing I want to say too, it kind of ties into what you're saying about not being strategic. You know, if we're feeling a wee bit helpless, sometimes all we can say to ourselves to encourage ourselves is, what can I do right now about that? You know, not even tomorrow or not even at 4 o'clock this evening. What can I do right now just to make things that wee bit better? And you know, what is it they say? The past is history. Tomorrow's a mystery. Today's a gift, and that's why they call it the present. It's all about what we can do now.
Yeah, that's so true. And there's also a lovely saying, which is, worry does not rob tomorrow of its sorrow, it robs today of its strength. You know, it's like, we're not going to ever change anything by worrying. I always say, don't worry, plan.
Yeah.
You know, don't sit there, oh, what if? Like, just go and make a plan. Of course, you know, it's the other thing about plans, however, I think you said in the beginning, Fiona, or somebody said, you know, that you know, plans, we make these plans and they're not going to come off. Emma, I think it might have been you actually. And there's something about this. See, I'm not a fan of plans, but I'm a massive fan of planning. I think the act of planning is it's helpful, it's reassuring, it helps us make things. So as soon as you turn that plan into, you know, as soon as you put that plan on paper, it's more or less useless. I mean, of course, you should put it on paper. So if nothing else, is a historical record of what you hoped you do, even if it bears absolutely no resemblance whatsoever to what actually turns out to be. But I also think there is something about, like, the act of planning matters. You're not going to deliver against the plan because you can't predict what's going to happen in the world. It's impossible. You know, it's like in my book, Fiona, in the trustees book, there's a cartoon. Griselda does the cartoons. Griselda does cartoons for Punch and New Statesman and things like that. She's so funny. But there's this one bit in the book, it's a battle on the border, where I'm talking about, you know, how like keeping trustees informed. But as a trustee, you need to get there. Often it surprised your chief exec and the executive as much as it surprised you. You know, they say, like, don't give us any surprises. It's like, okay, but if it's a surprise to me. And there's this cartoon she's done where one of the trustees are telling off the chief executive, and they're saying, like, why didn't you predict this? And in the window at the back, there's Godzilla. There's this cartoon of Godzilla. It's like, who could have predicted this? Nobody knows. No, even now, none of us know what's going to happen, you know. And I think we just have to live, even though it's uncomfortable, just live in that kind of uncertainty. Years ago, I nearly lost my job, and it was a very, very stressful time. And I remember going home to my father and saying, Dad, you know, I could lose my job, I could lose my income, and probably my reputation. I'll never get a job in the sector again, and all this kind of thing. I was really in a state. And I always remember my dad saying to me, the exact same skills and attitude and character that got you to where you are now, Debs, they can't take that away from you. You will still have all of that, even if you do lose your job and you can't get another job in your sector. So you just take those skills and that attitude and that character and you apply it to a new thing. And it was one of the most inspiring things I've ever had said to me, because I think that's true for us in our sector right now. Even if we're really struggling, all of the things that got our charities to be successful to where they are, all the work and the learning and the effort and the energy that we put in to being as awesome as we are, which we are. I don't tolerate these people who say the charitable sector isn't good enough or up for it or professional enough. They're just idiots and they clearly don't know what they're talking about. Is that all of those things you've still got. So even if your charity has to shrink or merge, or even if you've got to like cut back on services, in a sense, the stuff that got you to where you were before, you will still have that when we come out the other end. And we will, you know, as soon as we're able to do proper fundraising again, I think the world will come flooding. You know, it's a bit like hairdressers. You know, my own hairdressers were like really worried when they weren't able to do anything. And then as soon as lockdown was restricted and we could go, they couldn't cope with the number of people at the doors begging to have their hair done. You know, and I think that will happen to us too. I think that I think that it will step up, although I would not rely on the government, to be honest.
We've got Sarah French and then Kath. Just both want to make a couple of comments.
Sure.
Hi, it was just a quick point about authenticity. That's been quite a hot topic lately, across all sectors, I think. And certainly in the Northeast, and this isn't from my experience at site service, it's from previous, there's almost a lag within, I would describe it as the VCSE sector, charity sector, in terms of being comfortable with being authentic in their views, in their beliefs, in their wants. And I struggle with that. Those who'll know me, I'm quite outspoken. I tend to say what's in the front of my head, sometimes without considering it fully. But I think a lot of leaders, again, certainly in the Northeast, are quite uncomfortable with that, and they like to play it safe. And I appreciate that that comes from being dependent on funding, on grants, on, you know, not ruffling too many feathers because of where donations are coming from and where the financial support comes from. But for me, it's so interwoven with integrity that to have integrity with your beliefs and what you're trying to achieve, that authenticity is absolutely crucial. And you can still be authentic whilst being diplomatic. It's not an either or. So I think for me, that's just something I'm always really conscious and really interested in other organisations' approaches to how they deal with possible conflicts and causing possible conflicts by promoting and advocating for what they believe in. I just think that's a really interesting point, and it just came up.
It's so true, Sarah, actually, because we don't have to walk into like the local councillors and say you're all a bunch of wankers because you're not listening to me. There is a balance to be struck, I get that. But I think we've tended to err on the side of caution. And I always just say, you know, if we don't speak up for our beneficiaries, for our service users, for the people we're serving, who will? Who will? Who was next, Fiona?
Next was Kath, but I'm not sure what the 1, 2, 3 thing was there. So if somebody wants to talk, could they do so after Nick? So Nick's coming in. If you just flow on, Nick, after Kath, and then if someone else wants to talk, if you just message, then I can schedule that. Okay, Kath.
You're on mute, Kath.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So listening to everybody, and obviously Deborah, you saying about how it's okay to feel a bit crappy at the moment. I would say that our teams, I'm from Vista and we support people in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, have been quite the opposite. So when obviously the 23rd of March, occurred for us all, the teams were quite down because we said, obviously, we're not going out and doing face-to-face visits. So that would be the rehabilitation officers and also the guide communicators and also the ECLO teams in the hospitals, because there was a blanket, no, you can't come here. So they were carrying out very valued welfare calls to clients, because we're lucky we hold the register on behalf of the local authority. So we were carrying out that work, and I found that was they found that very challenging, because they're usually out and about supporting people and obviously going through reablement, orientation, mobility. And not that there wasn't any value in the telephone calls, but it just kind of held them back. And they didn't think they were doing much, but we know a telephone call can make such a difference to some people, especially if you haven't seen anybody. So as soon as we decided come August, and of course everybody knows Leicester has been on lockdown since the beginning of time, well, it seems like it, they were raring to go. So now it's onwards and upwards, digging in there and cracking on. And whilst there's I think, maybe caseloads are a bit varied a little bit because of that little build, but it just seems that spurred them on and motivated them even more, even though they're wearing gloves and they've got these visors and PPE. you know, and reducing those visits and doing those pre-session checks, actually the clients are far more important than thinking about themselves, if that makes any sense, because they've had the pooey part. Now they want to just crack on and make everything right for the clients. So I'm not to say we haven't got any teething problems. You know, I think we all will have teams who are happy to, probably just take a back seat and be like that till the end of time. But, you know, in general, the teams, you know, are glad to get back on track. And of course, with the guide communicator teams, with supporting people with dual sensory, they haven't stopped at all, very much like our care staff within our residential homes. So I guess from my point of view, as of overseeing all the teams, bless them, they've been stars, they really have. And, you know, I'm truly grateful, I really am, I'm very lucky.
Fab.
Thanks. Thank you, Kath. Nick, and then Sandra.
Thanks, Fiona. Hello, Deborah. I just want to say hi. I saw you speak at the Visionary Conference a few years ago, and it was just like having 20 espressos all in one go at the start of the morning. It was just brilliant. And I see your posts on LinkedIn, which always entertain me as well. And the great thing is you do that thing which I really think we have to do, which I used to joke to people when I first got into the voluntary sector that I was a voluntary sector agitator. And I always gave myself the sort of remit to actually say to people, I mean, it's that whole truth to power, but you know, we're talking power at local level, but there's still a power dynamic of actually saying what you need to say. And I think that's what you do when you lead from the front. And it certainly comes across in your speeches and your posts about saying those things. But I do think the tide is turning. And I was at a workshop this morning, which Sarah, who spoke just previously, led, where she led on a service that's been running in the Northeast, which is really collaborative, but it's being led by a voluntary sector organisation. I think that tide is turning. But I don't think we'd ever get that chance to turn to if there weren't people agitating and saying what needs to be said and being authentic, because you have to. Otherwise, what's the point? There is absolutely no point turning up, is there? And just one last point about to reflect. You were talking about, you know, that whole thing about the permission to, you know, say it's okay when you make a mistake, where you can't cope. And I just wanted to put the thought out to everybody. Do you think that's in a sector which is, in my view, probably proportionally more women than men in the voluntary sector, that it's harder for men in those roles to have that same ability to share that emotional stuff? We all grow up and we're told to be big, strong, tough boys. I didn't have someone tell me to put on my big girl pants, but it was the 70s, so I probably could have done. But you know, I think it's probably a little bit different for men in those kind of places where you maybe don't have that natural instinct. Just a thought.
It's a good question, Nick. I think it's something that's worth us considering, isn't it, about that issue? Because there is undoubtedly, you know, one of the reasons why male suicides is relatively higher in most of the people say it's because men are much less likely to acknowledge being in overwhelm. But I think whether we're a man or a woman as a leader, our job is to ask everybody, how are you doing? Just a quick tip, by the way, sorry, before I let whoever was next, Sandra, just a quick tip. When you ask somebody how they are, if you say, how are you? 99.9% of the time, they'll say fine. And that tells you nothing. So my tip is say to people on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you? Because people find it really hard to lie about a number. And so they find it very hard to say 10. And if they say 5 or 6, you then have the opportunity to say, okay, 5. That's not too bad, but it's not great. What can we do? Why is it only a 5 and not a 7 or an 8? And somehow people find it so much psychologically easier to have a conversation about a number than they do about to just sort of say, how are you? Oh, it's all really shit. It's terrible. I can't cope. People don't say that to that question, but to have a conversation about what can we do to get you from a 5 to a 10? Well, I need a year off work. Okay. Failing that, what can we do to get you to 5.5 then? You know, you at least then open the space for those kind of conversations. Sorry, Sandra, I cut into your space, but I just wanted to share that tip because I think
Don't worry. It's absolutely fine, and it's actually on the same sort of theme. So that was really useful to think about that 1 to 10 thing. I was going to ask actually about how people are kind of managing staff morale and assessing staff morale. I was in a session this morning with people from Beacon, and I know Lisa did a breakout session on emotional impact. I was actually in the opposite one, so I didn't do that emotional impact one, but there were some talk about staff surveys. I think we're doing what most people are doing, that we're keeping in touch on Zoom. We've got WhatsApp groups, but obviously it is different when you're not face to face. And I just wondered, are people doing staff surveys? In which case, how are you doing that? Is that a written thing, but that feels a bit formal? Is it a 1 to 10 scale and everybody's doing that verbally? Or just if anybody's got any suggestions really, is how you assess in reality rather than yes, it's all fine, and what people are doing if people aren't fine.
Can I just say to that? Sorry, you know what I'm like, Fiona, I'll talk forever. Do you know, one of the things we've done, Sandra, is given people time. So we changed it slightly now because the furlough thing, but we basically said to everybody that a 2-day weekend isn't long enough. You need 3. You need 3 solid days back to back to undo from the work. So we put the suggestion to our staff that they do their 35-hour week in 4 days instead of 5. So they either work a Monday to a Thursday, or they work a Tuesday to a Friday, and we split it. So we have what we call the Friday crew who work on Fridays, and the Monday crew work Mondays, and everybody works the other days. And we said to people, we won't count your hours. So we will trust you absolutely to get the work done and to use your hours as you see fit. We said to people, especially people with caring responsibilities, we said, you know, we absolutely get there, even though technically you're supposed to be working Monday afternoon, you're homeschooling. And Monday afternoon is like the shittiest time ever. So if you need to not be working and be spending time with your kid or whoever it is you're caring for on that particular, that's fine. We just trust you to make up the hours and to catch up the time. And I cannot tell you what an incredibly positive impact that has, but never mind about Zoom talks and chats and all the rest of it, we do all that, but just forcing people to have 3 days off and say you must not work. Well, obviously some of them are catching up on Saturdays and Sundays because they're also taking time out, you know, because of caring responsibilities. So literally doing things like that. So saying we won't count your hours, we absolutely trust you, and you're only going to work 4 days instead of 5 days, although, and without the pay cut, obviously, because they're doing their full hours in 4. And of course what happens is people manage the time, and they interestingly enough, the productivity goes up because people then they waste less time on the stuff that isn't really that important, because they're trying to consciously manage their hours better. So I would strongly recommend just do that for a bit.
Really interesting, good idea.
Sorry.
It's all right. Any other suggestions?
Well, I think Pardy wants to come in. And there's quite a lot of chat on the text. I love the idea of a tea dance. That looks really good. Tea and cake, yeah. And Chloe's saying her mic isn't working, but she's saying that they did Desert Island Discs and everyone loved it. That's a lovely idea, isn't it? Pardy, did you want to speak now?
Hi, Fiona. So I'm a Pardy. I run 2 user-led organisations at NFB UK and Acrobats, and I'm registered blind myself. And listening to our service users across the UK, it has been a postcode lottery in terms of how local sight loss organisations have offered services since lockdown, which is totally understandable because we are in unprecedented times. And I know as a VIP myself about the physical and mental fatigue that lockdown has had on myself and many other VI friends that I know across the UK. But I think what has really reassured me is this cross-sector collaboration. For example, on physical sighted guiding, on getting supermarket delivery slots. And it's about having that innovative approach because we all know how challenging it is for our service users, and we're all trying our best. Just recently, I organised voluntarily with a group of VI friends an innovative virtual weekend of events, including comedy, cookery, a talent contest. And I think it was the first of its kind in the UK. So it's about being innovative, but also embracing the technology that we have in these times to reach out and bring much needed laughter and enjoyment to our beneficiaries and service users.
Fab.
Thanks, Pardy. I'm trying to keep up with the chat here. Is there anyone else? Maggie, I noticed you've unmuted yourself. Is that because you want to speak? Absolutely no pressure if it isn't. I'm just trying to keep an eye on things.
Can I just say something, Fiona, about adults? I think sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves as leaders to think that it's our job to look after our staff and to make them happy. And, you know, particularly in relation to mental health, somebody asked me about this the other day, like, you know, what are you doing to make sure that your staff's mental health is good? And the thing is, I have a long-term mental health condition, which I've had for years. I've had it actually since I was very young, but it wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 30s. Thank God it got diagnosed when it did, you know, and so I've had good interventions ever since. But one of the things I've realized is that you cannot manage somebody else's mental health. You can't do it. And just as, you know, I think we have a tendency as leaders to kind of, without meaning to, be a little bit patronizing to our staff. I've always felt that, you know, the picture of an organization, so the traditional picture is it's like triangle. Can you see that's a triangle? You know, so the chief exec and the trustees at the top, and then you work your way down, senior managers, staff, etc. So for those of you who can't see, I've drawn a triangle, and at the top is sort of an apex. There's one or the board at the top, and then it sort of tapers down, and there's all the staff, etc. at the bottom. Whereas I prefer to think of a leadership role as being more like a circle, and that we're all just slices of the pie in that circle. So I, as a chief executive, am one bit of the pie, and my trustees are another bit, and the staff are another bit, and the volunteers are another bit, and the donors are another bit. And we all of us have something, we all of us need to like contribute, otherwise the pie isn't whole. But no one bit of the pie is any more important. We just have different roles. So with us at DSC, our basic rule is just tell people the truth. You know, don't protect people, support them. They're adults. They probably make harder, tougher decisions in their own personal lives than we ever require them to do at work. You know, like we asked them to sign a chit for a pen out of the stationery cupboard, or well, not that any of us could go near any stationery cupboards at the moment, but you get the point, rather than giving them the freedom to make decisions and then to back them up and support them when they make mistakes. So I try really hard. I get that, you know, I have a level of accountability which others don't, because I am the chief executive, but I'm not more important, for sure. And I'm certainly not clever or better. I know more across the whole organization, but not enough in depth, for obvious reasons, because I'm not the expert in marketing or in fundraising or in any of those things. You know, my job is to be much more sort of helicopter-ish. And so, yeah, you know, so again, I would say, like, treat them like adults, tell them the truth, you know, let them know what's going on, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to do the work in order to turn things around, bring in the money, serve those people we're there to help and things like that. So yeah, don't protect them, support them, and they will step up. I mean, you know, again, 99.9% of the time, when you tell people the truth, when you engage them with the actions that you're taking, they step up and they're awesome. I think people, when we kind of control the information a bit too much, and, you know, I mean, I'm not saying scare the living out of them, but I'm just, or obviously, you know, doing anything to stir the horses. I mean, there's some things you need to manage those communications appropriately, but just like, yeah, tell people the truth. Don't let them think things are okay when they're not. Don't let them think everybody's fine, you know, when they're not. Yeah, I like that, Fiona. Anyone want to come in? Getting a word in edgewise with me is one of the challenges in life, let me tell you. Anyway, there you go.
Because I'm flipping, because there's so many people here, I'm having to go backwards and forwards between two screens. But I think that's a really valid point, Deborah. As I mentioned to you, every week we have an open forum CEO session Tuesday morning, and we frequently talk about other people's issues and the staff's issues and how challenging it is for everybody else. But what we've started to do probably more in recent weeks, I would say, is talk about how difficult it is to have everything being difficult for everybody, and how hard it is to always maybe feel as if you have to put a brave face in it. And I think we concluded actually it's much more empowering not to put a brave face on it. But
although we always have to demonstrate hope. Our job is to be purveyors of hope.
Yeah.
You know, it's no point saying, oh my God, it's really disastrous. Like, you know, I can't see a way out of this. You know, I don't mean that level of honesty. I don't think that's helpful. But to be honest about the fact it's challenging, it's difficult, you know, but because without hope, the situation is hopeless, is like that old saying, isn't it? So our job is to be purveyors of hope. And there always is hope, to be honest.
Yeah.
Carol's waving, yeah.
I was going to say that answers what I was about to speak about. So, I mean, and so a lot of my background's in Chinese medicine. You've got the yin and the yang, and one will adapt from one to the other. So on one side, you've got the
I'm optimistic and hopeful on the leader. On the other side, you've got the balancing, when do I show my vulnerability? When do I say I can't do today? I'm having a duvet day. And I haven't ever managed to take that time. But have you got any advice on how to balance those two? Because if my inside matches my outside, similar to the person from north, south, east, if you're speaking your truth, you have huge power.
Yeah.
But when I'm not being truthful because I'm jolly when feeling broken inside, how do you balance those?
Do you know, I think there's two things sort of as a leader. The first thing is about authenticity, and the second thing is about demonstrate versus speak. So the first thing is about being authentic to yourself is incredibly important, but it's not being authentic to yourself as a completely raw human being. So for example, as a parent, if you're having a really crappy time in your relationship with your other half, you're highly unlikely to say to your 5-year-olds, I absolutely hate your father or your mother. You know, they're an awful person. I can't see this marriage surviving. You wouldn't say that, because that's not being authentic to your role as a parent. Does that make any sense? So I say you have to be authentic to your role as a leader. So to leak your own anxieties, personally, I think is horribly selfish, because that's not being authentic to your role as a leader. Your role as a leader is to tell people the truth about the situation, and then also to demonstrate. So, and if you can't do that, maybe leadership isn't the right job. And I think it's okay to say that too. I think, you know, I've known plenty of colleagues who, after they've had a session with me, have said, I don't want to do this chief executive thing anymore. I'm going off somewhere else. And I think that's okay, you know, because let's not pretend being a chief exec or a senior leader in an organization is really tough. One of my old directors, an operations director, he acted in absence for me when I was off for a while. Once, and he said to me that when we did the debrief, and I'm like, what did you learn? He said, well, I learned that by the time the shit gets to the top, it's really stinky. And there's real truth in that, because actually if the problems can be sorted out further down, they are. So by the time they get to your level, they're going to be big, sticky, difficult, smelly problems. So that's the first thing about authenticity. The second thing is about demonstrating versus showing. I don't think it's okay always to show your anger. So to shout, you know, but I think it is absolutely authentic to say, I am really angry about that. So do you know what I mean? It's about managing the way of sharing. So it's authentic to share your anger, but not necessarily to demonstrate it. I don't know if I've explained that properly, but it is okay to say, I'm really angry and upset about what's happened, versus doing the whole yelling, shouting, losing control thing. And I always say that if you do need to lose control, go and lose control somewhere else. So find someone else to shout and yell and scream at, somebody, you know, like really safe who you can rely on. And one of my dear friends, best friends from school, actually, is a girl called Debra, spelt differently to me. But Debra was absolutely reliable, because if I've got a really tough time, and if I think, you know, I'm being given a hard time and I'm not being treated particularly well by whoever, I will always ring up Debra and I'll say, like, they're just doing so and so and it's really hard and blah, blah, blah. And she will always say, without even asking me any questions about the situations, the bastards, don't they realize how awesome you are? And the thing is, because she automatically assumes I'm a goddess among women, I know that I'm not. It makes me laugh. It makes me feel better. You know, because there are times when, you know, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be coached. I just want to vent. I don't want somebody to say, what could you have done differently? Do you know what? If I could have done it differently, I probably bloody would. You know what I mean? It's like, it drives me mad when people say, like, you know, what do you think you ought to do? And I'm like, if I knew what to do, I wouldn't be asking you, you know, those sorts of things. So there are times when people just need to vent. And it's the same the other way around. For us as leaders and chief executives, it's very easy to think that we've got to solve the problems of our directors and our senior staff when they're weeping and whinging and wailing. And actually, at least half of the time, they just need you to hear them weep and whinge and wail. They don't actually need you to coach them through the problem or to tell them what to do or to advise them they need to fix the relationship. Sometimes they just need to hear you say, I know, she is difficult to deal with, isn't she? And you do brilliantly, and I'm so proud of you. Sometimes that's all they need.
I love that. I also have a friend that just like instantly is on my side, you know, and offers to do really horrific things to people that have upset me, which is sometimes just what you need, isn't it? It's just somebody to be on your side. You don't need the analysis or the questioning, or, you know, have you thought about seeing it from their point of view? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really don't want to right now.
I was having a little bit of a disagreement with my partner yesterday. I mean, we don't argue very much, but, you know, there's one particular thing, he was being quite pedantic about it. And I said, like, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? And he's like, right. Always want to be right. And he said, in fact, being right makes me happy. Next question. Which I think sounds genius.
Right, folks, we don't have terribly long. So I'm wondering, actually, if any of the other sessions this afternoon are talking about the smelliness of shit. Or is it just this session? I didn't, that was an unexpected turn of events. So anyone else want to come in and contribute anything? Flicking between these two screens. Debra, this has been really refreshing and a really nice way to finish off our first day. So I just wondered if you've got any, do you know, any kind of anything you want to share, because I know because I speak to lots of these people that are here today most weeks, and really the personal story of resilience is it's like old Mother Hubbard's cupboard, you know, it's getting bare. And I wondered if you've got any kind of quick and dirty suggestions other than taking a Friday off, which, yeah, I think that's a totally amazing idea. Won't be possible for everyone, I don't think, but, you know, we're not asking for cakes and feasts, even, you know, a wee jar of lentils would be nice right now. But anything at all you would like to finish off with, just to because I think your point about hopefulness, and that, you know, there are so many hopeful situations to be taken from COVID. Yeah. Is there anything in particular you want to finish off with around?
Sure. Yeah, I will. Two things actually. The first thing is gin. Gin is the answer to everything. That's all I have to say on that matter. And the second thing is about, you know, when I'm feeling really down, and this is what you need to know, right? An old boss of mine used to say, you can't expect the salary and a round of applause. And that's so true, because as chief executives, we very rarely get the praise. Most, you know, very, very often we're getting questioned or challenged, you know, and even if our trustees say, well done, you're doing a great job, on the whole, they're usually worrying about the charity. But I have to tell you, you're doing an amazing job, absolutely amazing. You are making life better for people, you know, and in those moments when you're feeling really down and really overwhelmed, remember that. Remember that there are people out there, I'll probably say this again tomorrow actually to the wider group, but there are people out there who say things like, if it wasn't for Sarah or Ethne or Ruth or Chloe or the or Vista or whatever the organisation is, I don't know how I would have coped. You know, in those moments of downness, remember you're serving a greater purpose. You know, you're not a slimy politician, you're not a manipulative, greedy business person. I mean, I'm being horrible because of course they're not all like that. Yeah. No, they're not all like that, but you know what I mean? What we're doing matters. It's making a huge difference to the world. I'm so, so proud to know you all. You know, the fact that people don't necessarily thank you, don't ever think that doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't absolutely incredible, because it really, really is. And hang on to that. You know, your purpose is a mighty one. Be proud of that and celebrate that. And just know that if you ever need anybody to tell you, the bastards, you're absolutely wonderful, don't they realise, ring me, because I will happily tell you that.
Thank you, Debra. So on that, don't let the bastards grind you down. I think we should finish